day 663 of this Trump administration, and talk of a power struggle amid an imminent White House shakeup is getting louder and more frequent now. Now we're hearing about a new force behind the push for personnel changes, and that would be her, First Lady Melania Trump. Today, her office publicly called for the firing of Deputy National Security Advisor Mira Ricardel, seen here at the White House as recently as this afternoon at an event. Stephanie Grisham, First Lady's communications director, issued this statement about Ricardel, quote, "It is the position of the office of the First Lady that she no longer deserves the honor of serving in this White House," Grisham said. NBC News has detailed reporting tonight about this latest development and other rifts within the White House. Quote, Ricardel has gotten into several disputes with the East Wing, also over the First Lady's trip to Africa in October. More on that later. Tonight, the White House told our colleague Hallie Jackson that Ricardel has never met the First Lady and made no indication that Ricardel has left the administration. NBC News also reports tonight Chief of Staff John Kelly may soon leave the White House. You may have heard this before a time or two, but now this has changed. Quote, questions about his future in the White House recently became more serious after his repeated clashes with National Security Advisor John Bolton and his deputy, the aforementioned Mira Ricardel. Kelly has also gotten on the wrong side of Melania Trump over staffing issues and travel requests. Some of the disputes with the East Wing have escalated to the president. 7 people familiar with the clashes said there have been instances where the East Wing staff were not treated as equals to the male-dominated decision makers in Chief of Staff Kelly's office, one White House official said. Just last month, Melania Trump spoke to ABC News on the aforementioned Africa trip about how she views some staffers working for her husband, the president.
Sources have told us, sources in the White House, that you are the gatekeeper, that you tell him who he can trust and who he can't trust. Is that true?
Yes, I give him my honest advice.
Has he had people that you didn't trust working for him?
Yes.
Did you let him know?
I let him know.
And what did he do?
Well, some people, they don't work there anymore.
Interesting. And an update on the story we first reported here last night via the Washington Post that Trump plans to soon replace his Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen, a close ally of General Kelly's. Early last week, the president started dropping hints that a shakeup was possible.
Administrations make changes usually after midterms, and probably will be right in that category, too. I think it's very customary. No timeline. No timeline.
You've got a lot of White House staff. Some have been talking about leaving. General Kelly has been rumored to be leaving.
No, people leave.
Nancy Cook of Politico, who's standing by to join us tonight, is the co-author of one report that paints the portrait of a White House increasingly on the edge, shall we say, and a staff in turmoil. Quote, bottled up hostility in President Donald Trump's administration flowed to the surface Tuesday during a remarkable 12-hour period following an awkward midterm détente and tense trip to Paris, over which the president is still seething. It's like an episode of Maury, one former Trump aide observed to Politico as the spectacle unfolded. The only thing that's missing is a paternity test. And the Washington Post and the LA Times describe a dark and contentious mood in the White House over the past several days. Former CIA Director John Brennan, who is now national security analyst for our network, told our colleague Nicole Wallace what these accounts may be signaling about this president.
It may be that he is behind the scenes and really concerned about where things are going. And that is a dangerous time, because if he feels that he is being increasingly cornered, how is that going to manifest itself? It's a White House's administration in disarray. This reflects this underlying tension that's just eating away at our government.
And with that, let's bring in our leadoff panel on a Tuesday night. Peter Baker, chief White House correspondent for the New York Times, the aforementioned Nancy Cook, White House reporter for Politico, and Jeremy Peters, political reporter also with the New York Times. Peter Baker, I have been looking forward to our conversation tonight because there's no other way to put it. You and I are old enough to remember First Lady Nancy Reagan getting sideways with Reagan Chief of Staff Don Regan, former CEO of Merrill Lynch. Don Regan was soon former chief of staff. So there's precedent for this, but how unusual is this and why?
Well, it was fascinating. Of course, Don Regan was chief of staff during Iran-Contra, and Nancy Reagan felt he had ill-served her husband. But the thing that really did him in was when he hung up on her at one point in a testy fury. And one thing I think must be true in any White House is you don't hang up on the First Lady. And obviously, we've now a situation where another First Lady is pretty peeved at aid to her husband. For her to make a statement the way she made today, on the record, out loud, that's something even Nancy Reagan didn't do. When Nancy Reagan chopped off Don Regan's head, she didn't do it in a public statement issued by her press office. It wasn't much of a secret, but it wasn't done in such an overt, outward way. And I've never seen I don't think either of us has ever seen any First Lady openly say what Melania Trump did today about a person working for her husband. It's an unprecedented situation. Obviously means you have to imagine Miriam Ricardel is on the way out, because how could a husband continue to employ somebody after the First Lady says something like that in a public statement?
Yeah, I had to read it twice and three times to fully understand the gravity of what I was reading. Nancy, there's some reporting out tonight that this official under John Bolton is very process-bound and process-oriented, that there might have been a dust-up over the First Lady's trip to Africa, a dispute over seats that should have gone to national security types instead of media types. Seats are very finite on those trips, as you know. What else are the people inside the West Wing saying to you?
Well, she has really been a contentious figure since she joined the White House. And I'm always a little bit reluctant to, report too much about women who are hard-nosed and behave hard-nosed in those situations. But there is a ton of reporting to really back that up. She has clashed repeatedly with Defense Secretary Mattis. And even during the transition, she was serving on the Pentagon transition team and tried to block a number of Mattis's picks after she herself could not get a job at the DOD. And she's really been sort of an attack dog for National Security Advisor John Bolton, sort of going after Mattis, going after people in the White House. There are reports of her screaming at people. And so she has, really been aggressive and also created a lot of enemies in the White House. And as we've seen, she's created an enemy in Melania Trump. And I think that makes it untenable for her to stay long. The remarkable thing about today was that there was so much personnel news coming out that it almost seems a matter of who's going to get fired first. Will it be Mira Ricardel? Will it be, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen? It's almost like we're waiting to see sort of what will happen over the next 12 hours.
And Jeremy, to that exact point, one hopes there is a whiteboard in the Office of Presidential Personnel where there may be suggestions of people to fill all these jobs. Let's just take Homeland Security. Let's take Chief of Staff. Cabinet level appointments have to go through the Senate, and that can be very tricky.
That's exactly right, Brian. And I think that if you were to look at some of the people who've been talked about as potentially being on a short list for, say, Homeland Security, like Chris Kobach, and who just lost this governor's race in Kansas, it's difficult to imagine he gets easy Senate approval. Now, it would likely be easier than in the current Senate because there are now more conservative members who've been elected that have replaced moderates, like in Tennessee and Missouri. But nonetheless, the president is not going to have carte blanche to get whoever he wants through the Senate. There is likely to be a considerable degree of scrutiny that the Senate continues to place on him, even though it's more firmly in Republican hands.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.